Coming up next.
That is so nice to hear, because when you're in grade 11 and 12, you feel like you have to have some people feel like they have to have everything figured out right there and then. I have a friend that became an insurance broker, and his line is, it was the last booth at a career fair that he went to. But he built a wonderful...
Yeah, not every industry or every job has booths at a career fair either.
That's true. He managed to build quite a nice life for himself, but he didn't grow up dreaming of becoming an insurance broker. So...
Welcome to the Job Talk Podcast, where we talk with people who love their jobs. Our guests open up about their challenges, surprises, and secrets to success in their industries. Through conversation, we explore their careers, past work experiences, and the education that got them to where they are now.
Today's guest is Carli Fink. Here's our Job Talk with a career development practitioner. Carli, thank you so much for joining us today. I think maybe a good start would be, could you tell us, our listeners, a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. My name is Carli Fink, and I'm an educator who has built my career so far as a student affairs professional in higher education. And that means I've held a lot of different jobs related to student development that happens outside the classroom at colleges and universities. So I've worked in things like student health and wellness, academic advising, academic success, identity development, admissions, orientation, and most significantly and most recently, career development.
Wow. We are going to figure out how you landed in that position. When you were leaving high school, did you know what you wanted to do?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I had like 1,005 ideas. I think in some ways I was drawn to working in education at a broad level. I knew I liked working with people. I knew I cared about the education system, in part, I think, because I was not particularly satisfied with my own experiences as a student from K to 12. So I thought maybe there would be something I could do to make the education system better and help students have good experiences as learners. I knew I didn't want to be a classroom teacher, in part because, well, a whole lot of reasons, some of which are probably not super relevant at this point. But I knew I didn't want to be a classroom teacher. So I thought maybe there were some other roles in education that could be a good option for me. And then I also thought about all sorts of other options like marketing, journalism. I was really into theater, so anything in the arts or music. I still am pretty into theater, but that's not my career for also about 1,000 other reasons.
What was your first post-secondary experience?
I went to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario.
Okay. And you were accepted into which program?
Oh, really takes me back, I guess. I was accepted into general arts and science. I actually went to Queen's in part because I wanted to major in what they called stage and screen studies, which is a major that's kind of like half theater and half film and media studies. And I really loved the idea of working in media or theater and thought that program was just so cool because it really combined both. And then to make a long story short, Queen's, especially at the time, I'm not totally sure what it's like now, they actually didn't offer a huge range of first year courses. And they didn't have a lot of sections of a lot of those courses. So it just so happened that the first year drama course was only available at one time slot. And that was the same time slot as first year linguistics, which I was also really interested in taking. And so I had to choose between them. And for some reason, I chose linguistics. And that meant because I wasn't taking drama, I couldn't major in stage and screen studies. And then I needed to take another course to fill my schedule. So I ended up taking psychology, and I absolutely loved my first year psychology course. So then I majored in psychology.
And were things starting to become more clear as you were going through it, or were you leaving your options open for what you were eventually going to do within your career?
I would not say that things necessarily became clearer, at least not really in the way that it moved me towards a decision. If anything, I think I only kept gathering more and more ideas about what else I could potentially do for a career. I think at one point when I liked linguistics, I thought about potentially becoming a speech language pathologist. At one point when I got really interested in health and wellness, I thought about going into public health. at one point I got quite into outdoor stuff and outdoor education. I thought about working at like a camp or a leadership training center or something related to outdoor education. So I definitely enjoyed keeping options open. And in some ways, I feel like I still do that, even though I'm more established in my career. I definitely pursue professional opportunities on the side and as a volunteer, ways to engage my interests and continue developing skills. And I also think that some of the movement I've had within my career, some of those different jobs that I've held, reflects the fact that I like variety and I like keeping my options open. So I've tried different things at different points, in part because I still have an interest in public health. So why not work in health and wellness within a university setting? And then I still have an interest in outdoor education. So why not volunteer with some kind of outdoorsy group outside of my work?
And what was your first professional experience? And I call it your first professional experience because we've all had jobs as we were going to school. But when did you feel you were really in your first real job?
So my first job was at an independent school, which had a really cool guidance program with kind of three key pillars of programming. One, the biggest one was mental health. And then the other two were academic success and career development. So the school did a bunch of different initiatives. They had some curriculum, they had some co-curricular programs, and they had some other sort of school-wide initiatives related to those three pillars. And my job was to be the program manager. So doing all of the coordination for all of those programs and then teaching or leading certain parts of those programs as well. And it was a really, really amazing first job, truly like a dream come true at the time. And I couldn't have asked for anything better. And it really did set me up on what's felt like a really rewarding career path ever since.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. Were you actually working directly with, can we call them students? I don't know if I want to call them clients, or were you more?
No, they absolutely were students, and I was working directly with them.
Okay, and maybe if we can talk a little bit about the people that were coming to you, what were they like when they were sitting down with you to talk to you? What were some of their concerns, and how do you think you help them?
Oh, so I guess to clarify, I wasn't a guidance counselor.
Right.
I was a program manager. So I wasn't sitting down with students in a way where they were formally coming to me and asking me for advice. Yeah. My role was technically to be more behind the scenes, coordinating programs. But in reality, and the reason I say I definitely did work directly with students in a lot of contexts in this job, the biggest was that my office was actually located in what was kind of like a study space where students could just hang out and do work. So a lot of students would end up talking to each other and talking to me in a less formal way there. So I wasn't necessarily working with them one-on-one in counseling sessions, but I would get to talk to them about pretty much everything going on in their lives at school. And I think the biggest topic that came up would be with grade 11 and 12 students because they had spare periods, so they were in there the most. And they were often concerned about what they were going to study in post-secondary and where they were going to go and whether they were going to get into the programs they were interested in. So that was the biggest thing we talked about. And I don't remember the other part of your question. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I'm all over the map in these questions, probably because I'm passionate about it. I started the podcast because I was a high school student in grade 12. I was graduating and I had no clear direction. And I was feeling a lot of frustration because I had a peer group where it seemed like the majority at that time knew what they wanted to do. And then I also, going through my career, made a career change somewhere midway. I'm just wondering if you have advice for students that are in grade 11 and 12, how they can start to find their direction in post-secondary and working towards a career.
Sure. So if you're open to it at this point, I think my go-to for this kind of question is actually to talk a little bit about a study that was done a handful of years ago. And I think it's just a fascinating and helpful study in a lot of ways. I've talked about it with a lot of students at different educational institutions, and it seems to resonate with a lot of people, particularly people like yourself and like me, who maybe didn't have career direction early in our lives and who felt like there was some pressure to get our act together, for lack of a better term. And so the study basically interviewed 100 people between ages 18 and 27, and talked to them about their careers and their career decision making so far, and tried to get a sense of how much they had planned for the certain things to turn out the way they had versus how much they just ended up changing course along the way. And it turned out that most people ended up changing course along the way in some way. But the researcher really grouped people into basically 4 different categories of how they were making career decisions. And one category, the category that you kind of said your friends fit into in high school, were people called the navigators. So they use this sort of sailboat metaphor to say, if everyone's like starting on the shore and just looking at this sort of ocean of career possibilities, the navigators are the ones who have a specific destination, and everything they're doing is helping them get to that destination as quickly as possible with as few detours as possible. And a lot of people think that's the only way, but it's not. The other ways include things like being an explorer, where you might not have a specific a specific destination, but you probably do have a bit more of a general direction you'd like to go. So those people might say, kind of like me, I want to sail towards a career in education or a career in communication or a career that's going to make an impact on society in this way. You have some kind of guiding principle. You just don't know exactly what that looks like, or maybe what the job title or titles are going to be that could suit you. And so you can sail towards that destination, and as you get a little bit closer, you might start to learn more details that could turn you into a navigator, where you eventually pick a certain destination and say, yes, that's the one for me, I'm going to go there. Or you might get to that destination and bounce around a little bit between a few different destinations within that broader area and be like, cool, I'm happy being in this general area. I'm happy bouncing around between a few different titles, maybe eventually picking one and staying there, or maybe not, and that's okay too. And then another category in the study were the drifters, those people who maybe set off without any plan at all and were kind of pushed into the ocean because they graduated and they had to figure out what to do. And this is true of people both when they graduate from high school and when they graduate from post-secondary. Not everybody has a plan. Sometimes you just ride the waves and see where life takes you. And sometimes that turns out really well for people, and sometimes it doesn't. And so each of these strategies actually has different pros and cons. But one of the things that came up in the study that was really quite interesting is that people who used any of these methods could actually find success and could land in gainful employment and could have jobs that they ended up enjoying. So probably my best advice to students who have recently graduated or who are on the cusp of graduation, whether from high school or a post-secondary program, is that maybe you don't have to have a plan right away, particularly if you're feeling like the desire to have a plan is mainly coming from external pressures and it's not driven by you needing a sense of structure. Maybe it's time to just lean into your curiosity, follow your interests, and see where those things take you. Ride the waves for a little bit if you're okay with that. And certainly in terms of having some structure to your life and earning some income, you can absolutely have a job, but that job doesn't need to define your career or your direction necessarily. So what was true across people using all different strategies, whether navigators, explorers, or drifters, was that people who found the most success were the people who were really keeping their eyes and ears open and basically looking for opportunities and putting the dots together or connecting the dots in a way that will allow them to do the kind of things they want to do, often in a way that's going to be paid work, but sometimes also in other ways that are just going to be part of your life. And not all of those things have to come together right away. So consider what the role of a timeline is for you and whether that's coming from yourself or from external factors.
That is so nice to hear because when you're in grade 11 and 12, you feel like you have to have some people feel like they have to have everything figured out right there and then. Um, I have a friend that became an insurance broker, and his line is it was the last booth at a career fair that he went to. But he built a wonderful.
Yeah, not every industry or every job has booths at a career fair either.
That's true. He managed to build quite a nice life for himself, but he didn't grow up dreaming of becoming an insurance broker. So
Right.
um, I'm wondering if we can talk about the current position that you're in and what your day to day tasks are in it.
Sure. So currently, I'm working in a part time, short term position as a professor of career development at Conestoga College. And that means that right now I'm teaching some remote courses, mainly for international students studying at Conestoga, to teach them things about how to build a career, particularly in the Canadian labor market. And so my day to day tasks involve being on Zoom, usually for about 3 hours in the morning, actually facilitating activities and sharing content with students. And then my afternoons consist of a lot of grading and answering some emails. So, because these are short courses, students have assignments that are due quite frequently. So, the grading load can be heavy. And then sometimes they have questions about those. So, they email me questions. And then I have to respond to them in a pretty quick fashion because the course picks up again the next day. And then between different sections of the course, I have breaks where I might not be working at all for little bits right now. And that's a conscious decision on my part to shift into a bit of a different chapter with my career because for the past, let's say, 8 years, career has really been a huge focus of my life. And that was wonderful and served me well in a lot of ways. But right now, I need something with a little bit more flexibility. So this part time, short term opportunity really suits what I need right now.
What do you think is most rewarding about what you're doing right now?
That's a good question. I think what I find most rewarding about my current job is really having the opportunity to leverage a lot of knowledge that I've built over the last, let's say, 4 years of working as a full time career educator and career counselor with students in colleges and universities. So there's a lot of stuff that I've learned about the way students think about careers and research on career development and the different kinds of careers and what it takes to build a career in Canada. And this course is really meant to pull it all together. So it's a fun opportunity for me to use a lot of that knowledge.
And what is the most challenging thing?
Yeah, I think one thing that's challenging about my current role is that students sign up for the class looking for some different things. So, for example, some of the students who are in my course are just recent graduates from high school who have come to college for the first time, and they are 18 years old, living half a world away from their family members and friends, and trying to survive and thrive in a culture and a country that they might not know a whole lot about. And other people in the course might be coming in with 10 years of full-time professional work experience in their field in another country. And now they're coming to college to upskill or learn something new. And they're taking this course because they also want to learn about how to build a career in Canada, but they're coming in with some very different knowledge background and some very different ideas and experiences related to career. So trying to deliver and facilitate a course that is going to appeal to both of those groups and everyone else who might not fit so clearly into either of those groups can be challenging.
Yeah. Not to go into great detail, but I was in a career for 20 years. I appreciate knowing what's coming in every 2 weeks, and I had benefits. I think there's a saying for it. It's called the golden handcuffs. And again, not to go into great detail, but I am calling it a midlife crisis. So I decided to leave that 20-year position to explore freelance opportunities still in the same industry that I was working in. But can you speak to the person that maybe doesn't love what they're doing and is trying to find a career pivot? Is there anything you could say to that person?
Sure. I mean, I feel like there's lots I could say, but for the sake of time, I'll try to pick just one
Yeah.
thing. And I think that would be if you've been in the same career for 20 years or even 10 years or 5 years, you've probably had a lot of interesting experiences from which you can learn a lot about yourself. And sometimes when we get into a routine and we're just going to the same job day in, day out, we know our colleagues, we can do our jobs well, we're not always thinking about ourselves, and the things that we might know about ourselves aren't always entering our awareness. So I would really encourage those people to engage in some deep self-reflection, perhaps on their own, or perhaps with a career coach or a career counselor, and start to identify what are the pieces of your job that you do still like and the pieces that you are still good at, and what are the pieces of it that you've outgrown or that you no longer like. So often I think people try to focus on the whole job, and they might say, oh, I've been in this career for a while and now suddenly I'm bored or tired or demotivated or sick of it or frustrated. So I'm just going to get rid of the whole job and find a whole new career.
Yeah.
And for some people that makes sense, but for other people, they might not need to do away with the whole thing. It might really be that there's just one or two aspects that really need to change. And there's not a lot of space in society for us to necessarily analyze those aspects. A lot of times when we talk about jobs, we go very surface level and we just focus on the titles. So the more that you can dig into those aspects and get really clear on what you like and what you don't like, what's working for you and what's not working for you, the more information you'll be able to have about yourself, your strengths, and your goals to be able to identify, when I pivot, here's what I'm looking for. And it may turn out that you're actually looking to do the same type of job, but as a freelancer, or the same type of job, but for a different employer. Or it might be that you'd like to stay with your same employer, but find a different type of role. Or you'd like to go down to working part-time. Or you'd like to really throw the whole thing out and start over again and go to law school at age 50. Who knows? There's a whole lot of options out there. But I think, analyzing the aspects is a good first step.
I don't know if you have this, and I'm just throwing it out at you right now, but there was a day and age, and I'm thinking about my parents' generation, where you did stay in a job for 30 years. What are the latest statistics out there? And you don't have to be specific to the exact numbers, but how many times can a person, or the possibility of changing careers through their lifetime?
That's a good question. I definitely don't have exact statistics offhand, but I do read a bunch of newsletters and labor market data and research that comes out about this sort of stuff. So I can say with a reasonable degree of confidence that it's become more common to change jobs and careers than it used to be.
Yeah.
That said, I do want to differentiate between changing jobs and changing careers, because I don't think they're the same. And I think very often people conflate the terms jobs and careers, but there can be differences. So changing jobs means getting a new job. Often for a lot of people, that job that they're getting is a similar job to what they were doing before, just at a different company, or maybe at a slightly higher level if they've been promoted. So it's quite common, and the exact amount of times that people will change jobs depends a little bit on the industry. But in many industries these days, it's quite common to change jobs approximately every 2 years. Changing careers, on the other hand, means thinking more broadly than just your job, thinking about what is sort of the overarching purpose of what work means in your life, or what are the common themes among different jobs that you've held, and thinking about that as your career. So in my case, that's why I refer to my career as being a student affairs professional or a career development professional, because I've had multiple different jobs that all kind of fall under those umbrellas. Sometimes people tell me, oh, you've had a lot of different careers, but I don't think that's true. I think I've mainly had one career and a lot of different jobs in it. Changing careers is generally harder than changing jobs. So people do still change careers, but it's less common. And I think the idea of particularly making multiple career changes over the course of a lifespan is still less common. It's certainly possible to make one or two, but it's a lot harder to really shift careers every, let's say, 2 years, because different careers generally require different types of training and different social networks that you might not have access to in your existing career.
Carli, are there any surprises that you've experienced throughout your career?
Yes. Oh, there have been plenty. I think probably the most prominent one, and the one that might be most interesting for your listeners to hear about, is a fairly recent realization I've had. And that is this idea that not all jobs are actually set in stone. And we as individuals and as employees have the opportunity to shape what we do at work more than we may realize. I think for me, when I started working, I had this idea that I was just going to enter a job and there would almost be like a to-do list of things that I needed to do because the organization that I was working for would have set things that needed to be done. And it would just be my job to carry out those tasks. And I think that idea largely came from the school system. And frankly, that most schools, at least including the schools that I went to for K-12 education, are pretty top down. Like teachers have set curriculum and certain assignments that they assign to you, and there are set rubrics they use to grade you. And so you become accustomed to basically being told what to do and how to succeed in it. But in the workplace, that's not always the case. Certainly, there's a lot of variety depending on your industry and depending on the exact function or role that you serve within a company or organization. But in a lot of workplaces, there might be an overarching idea of what somebody in your job needs to accomplish, but there's not always such a well-defined task list of how you need to do that or when you need to hit certain milestones. So you might have a lot of autonomy as an individual to decide how you're carrying out your work. And even if you're not satisfied with it, you might be able to have a conversation with your manager where you find other ways to kind of craft different parts of your job into a job that's going to serve you better and support you better and enable you to support the company or organization better, because employees that have the supports they need to succeed are better employees. And so I know in my last job, especially my last like full-time job before I started the professor gig, my manager and I talked about this often because we worked with students who were generally doing quite well academically. And sometimes when they would go out into the world and experience their first job, even jobs they would have as a student, they would be surprised that there wasn't as much structure or definition. They weren't always being told what to do and how to do it and when to do it by. And we came to see that even actually the things that enable one to be successful in school can sometimes be the thing that holds somebody back in a workplace. The idea that you need to wait for somebody else to tell you what to do is often a good thing in school. But in a workplace, many managers appreciate people who take more initiative, people who seek out answers proactively, people who propose suggestions for improvement or optimization without necessarily waiting to be assigned the task of, now can you optimize this? So if you're not satisfied with what you're doing at work, I hope this empowers you to consider how you might do things differently and start to initiate some of those interesting and perhaps challenging conversations with people who can help you create a better work life.
Wow, so well said. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best for the future, Carli.
Thank you. You too. Great to be here.
Thank you for tuning in to the Job Talk podcast. For more information, please visit us at thejobtalk.com. Our podcast music was created by our friend Mike Malone in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.